We're back with Season 7, Episode 16, Campfire Tales. This is when they go out and are attacked by flighters, which is terrifying and nightmare fuel to begin with, and in the process they end up telling tales of old and yore and all sorts of cool stuff, and we get some world building and some backstory. Then they succeed. The end. Before I go any further, I didn't want to forget about this. I want to talk about kids' shows. One of the most common questions I get, one of the most common complaints I get in comments and from friends and from family and from basically everyone is, Lore, why do you like a kids' show? Now, I hate that question because it's stupid. However, I want to, in my continuing approach and interest in understanding and acceptability and lack of judgment, blah, 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 something has occurred to me in recent time. I think that most people lump television into bundles, massive bundles, and as you might imagine, those are inaccurate. It's kind of like saying I like RPGs. Now, that might be a true statement. Indeed, I do like RPGs. But that's not really conveying any information if we're being completely honest with ourselves. Because RPGs is a gargantuan category, which can include many, many, many specific things, which are very different from each other. Remember, let's go with Neverwinter Nights. Let's go with modern games. Let's go with Final Fantasy 13 and Witcher 3 and I don't know. I'm trying to think of something that isn't by Square. Ys 13, that's the new one that just came out. All of those are RPGs. Also, while we're on the subject, so is Star Trek Online. That's another very different game in terms of format, structure, and everything. All four of those games are RPGs. The reason I bring this up, though, is I've decided that this isn't a kids' show. Not really. Because you could argue it's in the umbrella, the same way you could argue it's an RPG umbrella. But I feel like the way the language is used doesn't really indicate what it actually means. You know what I mean by that? In case you don't, let me just clarify. Language moves and morphs and distends over time. And I'm a big believer in that. I actually am fond of the fact that language adapts and develops and mutates and evolves, right? So something that means this something that meant this and means this is pretty normal. It's one of the reasons why I tend to get irritated, only a little bit, when people are like, oh, this means this, right? No, it doesn't. It means this, because this is how that word is applied now. So even though this, by technical definition, would have qualified as a kid's show, by the way those words are being used, it doesn't. I want to mention why this came to my mind. Just last week, obviously, every Tuesday, I go over to help my sister out with stuff. We're almost done with the yard work for the year, by the way. We have literally one task left. I got another bush out. I actually have a massive bruise and cut on my knee from getting that bush out. I hate removing bushes so much. But while I was there, the kids were over and they happened to have the TV on, and they were babysitting for a younger... No, the bricks haven't even arrived yet, Ross. That's the last thing I have to do. Anyways, so... Oh, you mean the bricks that are already there? Yeah, no, those are already done. The new bricks, the replacement bricks, haven't even shown up yet. Anyways, so they were babysitting for I think she's turning 2 this year-old. So very young, right? Very, very young. And they had a TV up, and the TV had a show called If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. Now, how many of you remember that book? I will raise my hand, of course. Right? If you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want a glass of milk, and that's the format, right? That is now a TV show. It's pretty wholesome. It's decent. But it is a kids' show. There's no complexity. There's no layers. There's no depth. There's no character arcs. There's no continuity. There's no nothing. I couldn't do, if someone was to try to pay money for a streamination of If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, the show, I would say no, because there's nothing to analyze. There's nothing there. It is, in the sense of the words that it is utilized nowadays, a kids' show. And as I happened to be there, I was recovering, because it's hot and humid, and this heat wave, which is supposed to be getting worse again next week, yay, has been horrible. So I was just sitting there recovering, and then the show happened to be on, and I'm looking at it like, God, this is... Like, I get it, because it was effectively education focused, right? It was kind of focused on trying to, where's the blue thing? It's like Blue's Clues used to be, which would also qualify as a kids show, by the way. Where's the blue thing? And then there would be a pause. The whole episode would pause for a second. There's like an audio cue for the pause, and then there it is. In other words, it's trying to prompt the kids into visual recognition and acknowledgement of terminology and blah, blah, blah. Right? And that really struck me, the stark contrast between them, because one of the biggest defenses... Hello, Undeathstroke. Love the name. One of the biggest defenses that I've always brought up when it comes to MLP is every argument that I've heard people use about how MLP sucks could be applied equally to Star Trek, any of Star Trek shows. And in fact, I've actually heard those exact same arguments leveled at Star Trek for decades. So, gotcha. I do recognize Undead Elvis. I didn't recognize Deathstroke. It's still a cool name. I mean, both of them are cool names, but Undeathstroke is really cool. So I'm sitting here, and I'm staring at that like, that is a kid's show, as the terminology is being utilized right now. That is dumbed way down. No nuance, as S.A. Ross said earlier. No substance, no nothing. It is there to be something for them to listen to while not really engaging them, and to help teach them extremely basic concepts like pattern recognition and color identification. And again, really bare bones stuff. And I have the very strong feeling that when people think of MLP, they're thinking kids show. It's not. It's extremely not. Anybody who's watched this show at all will tell you, even within the very first episode, even down to things like the animation styles or the references or the nature of how they construct the episodes, like the literal narrative construction of each episode and its act structure. Kids shows don't have act structures, you know? I looked into a couple other kids shows in more modern television, and yeah, they all follow the same basic pattern that If You Give a Mouse a Cookie did. Now, I'm not trying to throw shade at If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. It's fine at what it does. It is there to be a bare bones, here's something for them to watch while still engaging them in some manner. But contrast that with, and I'll just throw out a couple of examples here, Batman the Animated Series, or... Oh, God. I just had another example and I can't think of it. Give me a second. Shoot, I just had the perfect example. Avatar would work. Avatar The Last Airbender would work on Nickelodeon. I can't remember it. Whatever. Or My Little Pony. Just to go to the example that we're currently talking about. These are shows that are shows. Oh, that was the example. Pixar. Anything Pixar, really. Also, a huge amount of Disney films, if we're being honest. Not all. They don't all qualify. But most of the stuff I've covered on this show, for example, would qualify as something that is definitely not a kid's movie, for the Pixar stuff or the Disney stuff. Going all the way back to My Little Mermaid, or Little Mermaid. Little Mermaid is a perfect example of this. And I know you could use more modern examples. Hunchback is a perfect example. Tangled is a perfect example. Those are both Disney flicks. On the Pixar side of things, we have Toy Story 3, for God's sakes. Never mind Toy Story 4, which I'm not going to get into. Or Cars 1, which isn't that great of a film, but still had its points. But no, even if you rewind time all the way back to the frickin' 80s and look at Little Mermaid, that's not a kid's movie, in using the terminology that it's being applied as. Right? I mean, look at that nonsense. and by nonsense, I mean awesomeness. Hey, Sean. I swear I'll upload the lore week after I'm done with this. I just haven't had a time to, because I got to make timestamps. Now, this is a little bit of terminology here, but you get my point, right? the way I have heard the phrase kids blank applied in modern parlance and modern terminology, they are applying it to stuff like Pocoyo is actually a good example. By the way, don't watch Pocoyo. You remember me telling you how I got into MLP because I was watching a bunch of shows to see what's good enough for my niece? Pocoyo was on the not good enough for my niece list. Seriously. Anyways. But yeah, the really dumbed down stuff, the really this is the bare bones stuff, is absolutely the stuff that people mean when they are talking about things like this. Just like they used to mean that when it comes to Star Trek. After all, it's just a stupid sci-fi show. Why are you watching that show for babies? I just wanted to talk about that because, again, it occurred to me last week, and this is where I talk about that sort of thing. Moving on. Let's talk about the actual episode. That was 10 minutes. So this is when the legendary ponies are introduced. Actually, that's not true. The legendary ponies were introduced in the comics. However, this is when they are introduced to the show. So that's neat. There's a bunch of character stuff in this episode which I like, which I'll talk about later. But I like the little tidbit. Yeah, the same thing can be said about... Actually, it's another one I've heard, Darth Maduro. Comic? Why would you want to see a comic book movie? In fact, I've heard the phrase MCU movie used as an insult in pretty much the exact same manner. Anyways. So, at one point... yeah, you just said that, Larry. At one point, Scootaloo pulls out her little guidebook. Now, what's interesting about this, I had to look up the name of them, but those are Duranta berries, which are actually poison, which I remember because you don't unlearn something like that. But I mentioned that because I was like, oh, wow, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Duranta berries are poison. It also mentioned that eggplants are poison. No, they're not. Maybe they're poison to horses, I actually don't know, but I thought that was strange because they were listed as being even more poisonous than the Duranta berries. Anyways, the bugs swarm their camp. Can I just say this is why I dislike camping, in a nutshell? I actually love the idea of camping, and for example, if there was a holodeck that I could go onto and tell the program to delete all the bugs, I would actually enjoy camping. No joke. You know, getting out, roughing it, getting dirty and sweaty, and being out amongst the leaves and the foliage and the nature. I'm actually all in favor of that, except for the bugs. Bugs ruin everything. I'm not even joking. I mean, obviously, I guess I can't prove it to you, but I can prove it to anyone who's seen me working on my sister's yard for the last several months that I am not averse to getting out there and roughing it. Not anymore, Earth Tyrant. Dear God. Nuke. Anyways. This is... I'll get to that in a minute. Well, there you go, Ogre. That's actually interesting. Yeah, these are worse than parasprites. They're flighters. They're flying spiders. That is literally nightmare fuel. That is the kind of thing that would be in a horror film, for God's sakes. Well, yeah, probably loner, but you get my point. I fixed all the bugs. You can enter the whole thing. Damn it, Tyron. Anyways, so whatever. So they go and they rush and they try to hide. Rainbow manages to get the campfire, gets mega stung. It's funny because it only lasts for 2 shots. Even within the same scene, they get rid of all the wells, so she heals fast. My goodness. And as the moment they bring up Rockhoof is the exact moment I remembered this episode. All the campfire stuff, I was just like, okay, this is kind of cool, but I didn't remember it. See you around. Have a good day at work. I almost said Undead Elvis. Undeathstroke. It's going to take me a minute. It's going to take me. I'll get there. But the moment they mentioned Rockhoof, I remembered this episode. Because it's about the legendary ponies. I forget their proper name. They have a term. There is a proper term for them. And continuity will be... They'll be coming back, is what I'm trying to say. And I know that. Look, all I'm saying... Actually, speaking of Vikings, did you notice that they had winged helmets instead of horned helmets? That's actually amusing. That got a smile out of me. So Rockhoof. They also have 3 outhouses, which is fascinating in its own right. But then they have to evacuate the village because the volcano has exploded. So, okay. The villagers refuse to leave. Well, that's stupid, but I suppose if they want to die, that is their choice. I'm really big on choice. Everything's cool. Then Rockhoof decides to be crazy. Now, let's be clear. What he does is actually crazy. Then what, by my definition, it's not insane. You know, I talk about the difference between insane and crazy. To my knowledge, there is no explanation for Rockhoof's sudden empowerment. This is probably, I know this sounds so stupid, this is the worst part of the whole episode, is this exact moment. Hear me out for a second, because I dug into this for a minute. Now, Earth ponies are strong and tough and speedy and blah, blah, blah. We've talked about that. They do have their own form of magic that is established by this point in the show. It's not theory at this point. It is an established fact. So, no explanation. He just suddenly becomes and becomes a pseudo-Clydesdale. Okay, that's cool. Why? Now, my first theory craft is actively wrong, provably wrong, because my first theory was that what happened is that was the moment where, I say provably wrong, it could still be true. My first theory was that exact moment is when his cutie mark manifested. The idea that he actually, you know, this is who I am, and that gave him the strength and courage to endure and push through it, and blah, blah, blah. So, that would make a bit of sense to me. It wouldn't be a perfect explanation, but that would line up with everything that's been established in the show so far. And if you're wondering about inconsistencies, all inconsistencies can be explained by the fact that the tail has warped and mutated over the years. Inconsistency number 1 is the fact that he has his cutie mark before he transforms. Inconsistency in number 2 is the fact that he magically instantaneously turns into a giant strong pony, when in fact in reality it was probably more of a gradual shift. Because that's how tails work, right? Nevertheless, spoilers, we do know that something close to this actually happened. What we do not know is the exact specifics of what actually happened. Now, if anybody has any other theories on what happened, I'm more than willing to listen to them, because the alternative is A, the tale is made up. Mostly made up. B, he really did just magically, with no explanation, become super strong and super speedy, despite the many other instances where that could and should have happened to multiple ponies across the series. Yeah, I know, right? I say Ross. Across the series. Or that's all I got. I know this sounds like a weird thing to comment on, but it really did stick out in my mind, especially since it has no explanation, and no effort is even made to try and smooth this over. Whereas the stuff that happens in the other 2 story arcs is self-consistent, even within the tale. You know, even if you affix that asterisk of this is not the truth that we're watching, it could be, because everything we see is internally consistent with itself, and with the rest of the setting. The one thing that doesn't fit is this scrawny pony who is emphasized to be pathetic suddenly becoming strong. Like, it's not like Magnus, oh my god, I can't say it, it's his name, suddenly learned how to fly in his tale, or Mistmane suddenly learned how to cast magic, right? It doesn't fit. Weads is correct, of course, that is common in these types of stories, but the thing is, it's the minority in this case. It is the exception, which is why I take exception to it. So anyways, negative to story, moving on. The magic, I mean, well, this episode does establish 3 artifacts, which will come up later as well. So it is possible the shovel was in fact artifact level, and that's why this happened. Although it doesn't explain a lot of other things, but, you know, sure, that's something that I could at least believe, and that is an explanation. Moving on. Sweetie Belle is rather bleh about the cave, because, you know, the cave sucks. We've done the book cover story a few times in MLP, but this is a nice segue into talking about this thing. So then we have Mistmane's legend. So, I'm sorry, let me talk about something really quick here. There's something I call the writer factor, which is a degree of trust. I've talked about this relatively recently. It boils down to how much trust and faith you have in the writers, which kind of changes everything else. Now, if you've never heard me talk about this, I've talked about this in my ruminations, but if you've never heard me talk about this, let me explain briefly. Let's assume for a moment that there's an episode of a show, and one of the characters does something that's off, right? Something that doesn't make sense, something that is inconsistent. If you have faith and trust in the writers, that's a sign, that's a hint, right? That's foreshadowing. If you don't, it's bad writing. And you see how this is a gulf and a difference and a gap between these two things, right? Now, I actually have a fairly large amount of faith in the MLP writers because this is an episode where they bother to research the fact that eggplants are poisonous to ponies. I can point to reasons why I have faith in the writers of this show. So when I see an inconsistency, it sticks with me, right? But another example of this is while we're doing Mistbane's tale, there's little details in the animation that if this was just a tale being told, probably wouldn't even be there, and yet they themselves serve as additional aspects of foreshadowing and good storytelling. Perfect example. The first thing we see is that Sable is there. She's not even named yet, but she is present, and she's the only person who isn't fawning over Mistbane, right? And when Mistbane leaves, she just kind of goes and kind of walks off in a sulky manner, right? Before we even have the character named, we already have a bit of foreshadowing of the connection between her and Mistbane and the story arc she's going to be going through over the course of her tale. The next thing that happens is Sable makes it clear that she has no core. Now, this is a very truncated story. It's only more like a fourth of a 24-minute episode, so she only gets a few minutes of screen time to develop. But anybody who's ever heard me talk about Garrosh Hellscream has heard me talk about this kind of character arc. If you have not heard me talk about that kind of character, don't worry, Hellscream's going to come up all the time in the Lorecraft series. He is one of the most major characters in all of WoW. To summarize, Garrosh had no core, which means he had no true... I'm trying to think how to phrase that. He had nothing to build off of. He had no bedrock, right? Internally, in terms of his personality, his mentality, his opinions, whatever. So what he would do is he would take other people's opinions as his own. He sees something else and he says, that's true, because that's something someone else has said. This is a character type, but it's also something that's true in real life. I've seen a lot of people in my days who have no core and therefore just kind of take other people's ideas and hold them as their own. Enter Sable. This woman obviously had absolutely no idea what she was doing and had no core, and so in how she sees Mistbane presented, she takes that idea and owns it. When Mistbane shows up, proves her wrong through action, and defeats her, she takes that idea and owns it. In both cases, she is behaving self-consistently. No internal process, instead only relying on the external input. In fact, it's from the same other person in both cases. Side note, I do like how they have different style horns to differentiate them. It's a nice little touch. I also like how Mistbane's healing magic is actually healing transference, since that always tends to make more sense than straight up healing. Especially with the way magic has been shown in MLP, just in general. I have a couple other notes here. You know, if I found out one of my friends, capital F friends, went evil, I probably wouldn't believe it to be legit. But then again, I only have 3 of those in the entire world, so make of that what you will. There's also the concept of beauty is everything, which does have a strange amount of validity to it. After all, we as a species are literally attracted to attractive-looking things, or attractive-sounding things, or attractive-tasting things, or attractive-smelling things. It's a species thing. Now, I don't actually mean that romantically. It does apply romantically, but I mean that in every other way. We are more likely to buy a product, or watch a show, or listen to someone, or care about their opinion, or become friends with someone, or at the very least, look at someone if they are attractive. I've talked about this topic before. Look at my notes here. This is when I bring up another thing. So, let's pause before we talk about Flash Magnus's tale. I like this episode for the world building. I do. There's apparently a MLP China and MLP Scandinavia, and of course the Dragonlands, which we already knew about, but something called the Royal Legion, which I'm actually going to talk about in a minute. But the thing I like about this episode is even if the world building was total crap or absent entirely, this episode does something correctly. Character development. Point, in fact, showcasing character development. So first of all, they're going on another camping trip. Okay, continuity. Cool. I agree, Ogre. A. Sorry. Scootaloo is still scared. That's not yet Imperial Starter Shot. It's coming up later. I think that's next week. Anyway, Scootaloo is still scared of all this stuff. And yet nobody's making fun of her for it. She's being more open about it. And Rainbow is very understanding about it consistently. We also have Sweetie Belle, who is getting stronger. You know, magically stronger. In fact, she literally actually throws up a force shield for a bit earlier on. Someone in chat pointed that out, and I wanted to wait until here to mention it. And of course, Rarity is okay with only bringing 3 bags and a smaller tent, and is generally far more enjoying the idea of roughing it because she gets to spend time with the rest of them, right? Because it is worth the activity of the doing, right? We are literally showing character development in this episode, and I'm always in favor of that. But there's other little tidbits here, and I wrote down a couple. There's this bit. Shoot, actually, apparently I didn't write them down. Well, whatever. Rainbow is awesome for most of this, and most of them are Rainbow in the way she reacts to Scootaloo. But since I'm bringing it up now, later on there's a bit where they have to escape through an underground river, right? So, 2 bits. First of all, Rarity has a lamp light going on her horn. When she goes underwater, the light actually dips away until she pokes her head back over the water again. A very minor point, but again, the animation continues to be awesome in this show. The second point, though, is that Rainbow... So Scootaloo's still looking a little bit nervous, so Rainbow picks her up and places her on her belly so that she doesn't have to go through the water like the rest of them. And when they escape out of the waterfall, Rainbow immediately catches her so she doesn't fall and get scared. There are, I think, like 6 or 7 little moments like that where Rainbow just sort of automatically is both understanding and protective of Scootaloo throughout this episode, and that's awesome. Yeah, no kidding, Ogre. Star Swirl is a terrifying individual in general, but we'll talk about him in a bit. And by a bit, I mean like a few months from now. Anyway, so rewinding a bit, so let's go to Flash Magnus' story. A quick side note, you may have noticed I haven't really talked about the actors. That's because I looked up all the new actresses and actors for Mistmane, Flash Magnus, Sable, and the dude who's with Sable. They're all new. Like, they've done like 3 or 4 roles in MLP, and like 3 or 4 things, games or shows, whatever, since then. But that's it. They have like 10 credits to their name. Interesting. I don't know if that's deliberate, or if that's, you know, trying to get new people some experience with regards to voice acting, or if they just wanted them because they're cheap. I have no idea, but I think they did a good job in general. Anyways. So, they have to cross dragon territory. The dragons are not going to allow them because that makes perfect sense. We literally talked about this last episode. The dragons are combative and territorial. So, you want to walk through my territory? Piss off! I mean, how many times have we seen a Star Trek race who has that exact same problem? Also, yeah, if I didn't mention this, I'm sure someone would point it out, and Sean has already pointed out in chat before I could get there. My literal next note is, that's totally Torch. Younger, obviously. He is literally smaller looking. But no, that's absolutely Torch. And this, the reason I want to bring this up, isn't just the fact that, hey, it's Torch. It's this is writer factor in demonstration. If this was a show where the writer factor was low, where I didn't have trust or faith in the writers, then I wouldn't make anything of that. That's just a reused asset. You know, like how Lyra and Bonbon were back in Season 1. That wasn't always Lyra and Bonbon. In fact, several times there were multiple of them in the crowd at once, because it was just a generic copy-paste. So, no faith, nothing to read into. Fast forward to this part of the show, I have tremendous faith in the writers and creators in the animation department. That's absolutely Torch. You see the difference? Writer factor is extremely important when it comes to analyzing fiction, because you actually cannot analyze fiction unless you first establish where your writer factor is at, right? Because it changes everything. Someone gave a sport. There it is. If a good coach signs a player, that player has something. If a bad coach signs the same player, he's terrible. It literally. That's why I call it a factor, because it's a magnifying effort. It's a multiplicative. It changes everything about analyzing, and it has to be established first. Anyways, I also mentioned this because some people were coming down on me hard for expecting good literary concepts from this show back when we were analyzing season 1 and 2. You remember that? I got a few comments both in chat and in the comments on the YouTube VODs about, I think you're expecting too much from a kids show. No, I'm not. Anyways. So, Flash Magnus literally tanks, which actually got a smile out of me. He taunts and blocks and everything. I mean, come on. This is also when we really start to see the third artifact thing. We've already kind of seen the artifact motif in the shovel and the flower, but seeing it in the shield really hammers in the idea, no pun intended, of these ancient artifacts in the traditional sense of the word, of what artifact usually means in your classic Dungeons and Dragons kind of approach, or even World of Warcraft for that matter. The Flash sequence is just fun. I don't have much to say about it, except for one thing, and I said I'd bring this up later. We have the Royal Legion and the Mighty Helm, and both of them are great warriors, and, well, let's be honest with ourselves, the Royal Legion manages, at cost, but they still manage to defeat 2 dragons simultaneously. Everything else that has been showcased in the entire show shows that dragons are terrifying, dangerous creatures, and the idea of one dragon has been a horrible thing to most of them. Now, yes, we're talking about Ponyville versus a group of military, actual military, but that's my point. Do you think... So this is not the first time this is shown, because several times when we hear tales of old Ponyville, old Equestria, not Ponyville, old Equestria, or before Equestria was around, we see that ponies were a lot more, for lack of a better way to put it, badass back in the day. Now, why do you think that is? I have 3 answers for that. The first, they're copying Tolkien. That's it. A huge number of fictional writers will have their past be stronger than their present because Tolkien did it. I could go on a rant about how they don't understand why Tolkien did that and don't understand the reasonings, and they're just bullet pointing and copying because that's what you do, but... Point being, a lot of people do this because Tolkien did it. The second answer I find more interesting. They needed to be more badass back in the day because they hadn't tamed the environment yet. Because they weren't at a state of peace and civilization yet. It's the same reason why someone has the ability to do a sitting job nowadays as opposed to everyone having to work in order to be able to pull their weight. It's because as time happens, civilization gets involved. And we don't need everyone to be as on guard, and not every person on deck is necessary in order to survive anymore. Oh no, they totally did try exit. This also leads me to option 3. Both. Some people copy the Tolkien thing and then come up with a reason for it. And these are not mutually exclusive reasons. So they could have looked at the Tolkien thing and then come up with an excuse for it, and that's where we're at. My thoughts. Either way, this is when I mentioned the torchlight thing and rainbow catching thing, and there's just some wonderful character stuff here, which I suppose I'm going to go... I have to decide how many continuity counters to give this, because they directly mention the previous camping trip, and they directly mention Scootaloo's issues, and they directly mention Sweetie Belle's thing, and they directly mention Rarity's thing. That's also true, S.A. Ross. Oh my goodness. That could also be Trihexia. Someone, Star Swirl, who is absolutely the kind of person who would banish or destroy anyone in his path, because he's kind of a scary dude, as we'll establish later, is absolutely the kind of person who, would probably do exactly that. Who would say, oh, you're a threat. The Eloy, that sounds familiar. Oh, Time Machine, right. Gotcha. So, in other words, you agree with me. Is that it? I think that's actually it. Oh, right. I was giving out continuity counters. I'm gonna just give out 2, I think. Whoops, that's the wrong number. You know, 1... just kind of baking them into 2 is what I'm really doing here. Because there's a lot of continuity, and it's all little stuff, but it's all good stuff, so I'm with it. Which means we have to rate this episode. So I think this episode is total garbage. I'm sorry, that was a question. What do you think about this episode? I don't like to give my opinion first because I don't want to sway other people's opinions. So I am asking for your all's opinions first. I will say this now, since some people have given their opinion already. I can't see this episode being purple. So that's at the very least a ceiling, right? Because there's no way. First of all, it doesn't have the oomph. Second of all, it just doesn't hit the way a purple does. And third of all, it has flighters. How can any episode with flighters be purple? It's just, ugh, disgusting. Yeah, the world building is good. There are good character development things. There's no oomph. The writing's okay. It does have that one moment with the shovel thing, which, I'm sorry, does actually drag the episode down a bit for me, because it's just... It's the one inconsistency in the entire damn episode. It's the one thing where it's like, hey, and what? So I'm seeing some people arguing around red and orange. I was going to go ahead and say orange, which is above average. I think this is a good episode. Oh, absolutely, Darth Medora. This episode is by Barry Safchik and Michael Platt, who have never written for MLP before. I have no idea if they ever write for it again. So, once again, the Season 7 trend of new writers continues. Just keeps being a thing. Like, honestly, the fact that the previous episode's writer had written one other episode made it kind of an unusual thing. I don't know how much of that we're going to keep seeing. It'll be interesting to follow as we go forwards. Let's see, we have Daring Done, which is going to be by G.M. Barrow. That's a returning author. And... what's the other episode we're covering next week? To Change a Changeling. See, I don't like that ogre, and I never have. I know what you're referencing. I just... no. Change a Changeling was written by Kevin Lepin, which I think is another recurring. Yep. He wrote another Season 7 episode. But yeah, these people did their research, other than the one scene, so... I think I'm going to go with orange. I think we're going to go with above average. There's the scene I didn't like, and there's just a general lack of oomph. But other than that, this was definitely a better than usual episode. Next week, we cover To Change a Changeling, which I do remember, as we've previously explained, and Daring Done, which I don't remember, like, anything about. Like, obviously, based on the title alone, I can tell you that it's about Daring Do. That's all I got on that one. Unless that's the Egypt episode, in which case, never mind. It is, isn't it? Never mind, I remember that episode perfectly well. Except for the fact that Daring Do is in it. I don't remember her really being involved in that. Which says a lot about my priorities. Never mind, I do remember that episode. Well, we'll have more world building next week. And more world building next week. This continues to be the season of world building. But for now, next time I will be streaming. Here, let me hit the